his noble messengers, and in particular on the last of them all, the Blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Brother Chairman, Brother Sean Daly, my learned and distinguished colleague Piero San Giorgio, I'm honored to conduct this seminar jointly with him today on preparing for nuclear war. He is going to do the substance of the subject, preparing for nuclear war, and I will explain the subject, explaining nuclear war. I once asked my teacher, Maulana Fadlur Rahman Ansari rahimahullah, that the Quran says that it has come for those who have fear of God in their hearts. That's how it starts. So I said, what about the rest? So he pointed up to the sky and he said, look at the stars above. For most people, they're just beautiful up there. That's all. Beauty. Twinkling stars. We have a distinguished poet in our gathering here tonight. He writes poetry in Arabic. But when Allah speaks about the stars in the sky in the Quran, He says they're there for more than that. The stars are there to guide you, if you know how to read them. If you can look at the stars as a whole, connect the stars together, get the big picture, then when you are in the middle of the ocean, navigating a ship, you can look up at the stars and see which way to go. The verses of the Quran are like that, and so too history. There are those who look at the historical process and they see only events, and they remember names and they remember dates. And they say, but perhaps the world is just moving this way and that way. Like a piece of wood in the ocean, the wave is turning, tossing it this way and that way. That history is just moving in any direction it chooses to move. But then there are others who usually don't watch television. That's why they can think. And because they are people who can think, they're able to connect the dots of history. And they're able to see a pattern emerging in history. And read history differently from that which is presented in the history books. And such people look at the world today and say we are on the brink of some big catastrophic event. And these are not people who are simply Christians or Muslims or so. Piero is secular in his thinking. Piero wrote to me a few years ago and said, I don't understand it. How come? You from religion and I from the secular world, and we came to some conclusions. So that Allah gives His light to whomsoever He chooses. And with that light you can read and connect the dots of history and understand where we are and anticipate what's coming. It's like dry wood and you just need a match. That's what it is now in northern Syria. Those who created what is called the Islamic State, ISIS, and what I call the bogus Islamic State, are now in a quandary. because they created this after great planning. And they had a great design. And they're pursuing momentous aims and objectives with this ISIS. But now it faces collapse. The Russian intervention in Syria is bringing ISIS to a close. It's bringing down the curtain on ISIS. And they can't allow that to happen. They are a people who have, excuse my blunt language, they are a people who have PhDs in hypocrisy. They tell monumental lies and then put on their best suits and go to church on a Sunday morning. Or go to the masjid on Friday. Without any shame and embarrassment. They created ISIS. And now they want us to believe that they are bombing ISIS. But because ISIS is collapsing, because the insurrection, the armed insurrection that was planned, meticulously planned in Syria, is now falling apart. And the army of the Syrian people, not the one that came from outside and is paid $1,000 a day, the mercenary army, the army of the Syrian people, whether it is Christian or whether it is Muslim or whatever it is, the army of the Syrian people is now winning the war. That's why we now have arrived at a flashpoint. We begin our presentation today in explaining nuclear war by advising that we look to two cities in particular, Aleppo in northern Syria and Mosul in northern Iraq. They cannot allow either of these two cities to fall. No. So that we are now faced with the possibility, maybe another few days, maybe another few weeks, and we know whether my talk has substance in it, that NATO's very important member called Turkey, led by President Erdogan, is likely to launch an attack on Syria in order to stave off defeat. And that Saudi Arabia is likely to be part and parcel of that attack. Is likely to be part and parcel of that attack. If that attack takes place, will it take place with the consent and blessings of NATO? Or will Turkey and Saudi Arabia be moving out on their own, hoping that NATO will intervene? That's the question I cannot answer. I don't think anyone can answer that question. And so there are two possibilities. This is the micro-analysis before we proceed with the macro-analysis. There are two possibilities that we can be facing a war which is going to be limited in scope, in which NATO may decide not to intervene, and Turkey and Saudi Arabia will have to fight it out on their own, and they're going to lose that war. Russia will defeat them. If such a scenario, and now I have to choose my words with particular care, if such a scenario were to emerge, this is the first option, then at the end of such a limited war, the outcome would not be difficult for us to envisage, namely that Iran will be the dominant actor in that entire region.